The Venezuelan defense minister has called for national unity as the country tackles the problems caused by the illegal U.S. blockade. Jamaica extends the state of emergency in popular tourist destinations. And the migrant rescue vessel Open Arms has now spent 12 days waiting for a safe European port. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo. This is from the South. The Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez has called for national unity in order to face the new blockade imposed on the country by the United States.
There will be no coup d'etat here, no de facto government, and no kind of transition. Here, there will be elections in accordance with the text of the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Padrino Lopez also condemned the political minority supporting the blockade on Venezuela, calling them a fifth column and saying they hope to see the people starve.
There's a political minority here in Venezuela, a traitorous fifth column, who have no country and want to see desolation and hunger in the eyes of the people. They're a cowardly political minority who need to learn some lessons. We could use the classrooms at the Bolivarian Military University to teach the traitorous and unpatriotic minority some classes on political and citizen virtues.
The defense minister was addressing members of the Bolivarian Armed Forces who have been signing the government's document for peace, freedom and sovereignty, condemning interference and aggression against the Venezuelan people. Our correspondent in Caracas, Leonel Retamal, has more.
We're at the Tuna Fort military base, where they have set up these tables so that serving soldiers can also be part of this mass drive to collect signatures of the No More Trump campaign. You'll remember that this campaign was started in response to the latest stepping up of sanctions against the Venezuelan people by President Donald Trump. So these tables have been set up here, as they have been in many parts of Venezuela, so that the members of the armed forces can add their signatures against the blockade. They say this is the people in uniform, who are signing for peace, for tolerance, and for dialogue. The military leaders here have also strongly condemned the position taken by some sectors of the opposition in favor of such sanctions. The Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, said that such attitudes should be dealt with by the justice system, because they encourage the suffering of ordinary Venezuelans. He also said that elections should be held in Venezuela, but only in line with the Constitution. He said the armed forces completely support the work that the National Constituent Assembly is doing in this direction. And he finished the event held here by saying that the Bolivarian armed forces are not susceptible to the kind of division that the opposition and the United States have been trying to foment, that they are totally united behind the constitutionally elected president, Nicolás Maduro.
We thank Leonel for that report. Members of the Norte de Cauca indigenous community have gathered to bid farewell to the two indigenous guards murdered on August 10th. They met at San Francisco Square to reject the systematic assassinations of social leaders in the region. Indigenous organizations have denounced what is becoming a genocide against their communities. The latest victim of paramilitary violence in Norte del Cauca is Orlando Gomez. He was kidnapped and murdered in the Calota municipality on Monday. Gomez was head of the local agrarian business school. The Colombian Educators Federation condemned the killing.
The FtS Executive Committee completely rejects the murder of our colleague Orlando Gomez, a principal in the municipality of Calota in Cauca. We reject it and are disgusted by it. We demand that the national government, the President Iván Duque, the Interior Minister, the Education Minister honestly provide union guarantees for teachers in Colombia. They are killing us, and our government is doing absolutely nothing to protect us.
And staying in Colombia, the National Electoral Council has opened a preliminary investigation into former President Juan Manuel Santos. The investigation will focus on supposed funding from Brazilian construction giant Odebrecht for Santos' 2014 election campaign. A corruption scandal linking Odebrecht to top political figures has rocked Latin America. Moving on, more than 150 cities and towns across Brazil are holding protests in defense of public education. One of the first marches began in the capital, Brasilia. The demonstrations and stoppages have been called by the National Union of Students and other social movements. In Brasilia, they have been joined by indigenous women who are protesting against President Jair Bolsonaro's environmental policies. Our correspondent, Danay Galetti, is at the protest in Brasilia with more.
There are mobilizations throughout the country, and as one of the marchers here in Brasilia told us, this is not about demanding rights, but about defending the rights that have already been won by the Brazilian people and which are under attack by the policies adopted by President Jair Bolsonaro. It is against his pension reform and to put pressure on members of Congress where the Senate is due to vote again in the pension bill. The text has already been amended somewhat and as a result of popular pressure, but the protesters say it is still very damaging to workers' rights. They are also protesting against the 30% cut in the funding for public universities. They are also against the criminalization of social movements and in favor of the release from prison of former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. 2,000 indigenous women have joined the march here in Brasilia. Yesterday, they were occupying the offices of Indigenous Health Services to demand that the service not be handed over to local governments, which are often dominated by economic interests opposed to indigenous communities. They have been left very vulnerable since the Bolsonaro government forced out the Cuban doctors who served many of those communities. So, in this day of protest that brings together many of the big issues of Brazilian society today, including the defense of the environment, which is under the threat of cattle ranchers, mining, and other extractive industries promoted by President Bolsonaro.
In 2015 and again at the beginning of this year, the world watched as two cities in the Brazilian state of Minas Gerais were overwhelmed by environmental catastrophe. Both disasters were caused by the collapse of dams belonging to the Vale mining company. Our correspondents have traveled to the area to show the drama experienced by these communities and their struggle for another kind of mining that respects people's rights. This is the first of their reports.
With more than 21 million inhabitants, Minas Gerais is the second most populous state in Brazil and the fourth biggest in size. Mining has been one of the main economic activities here since colonial times. Africans, kidnapped and enslaved by the Portuguese, were forced to work in the mines, digging out mainly gold and diamonds.
It is important to understand how important gold mining here in Minas Gerais was for the growth and consolidation of international capitalism. It was the gold from Minas Gerais that made possible the Industrial Revolution. It financed the Industrial Revolution in England.
It wasn't until the 1930s that President Getúlio Vargas nationalized all of Brazil's mineral wealth. Vargas also agreed a loan with Washington that led to the creation of the state mining company, Vale do Rio Doce. Decades later, during the government of Fernando Henrique Cardoso, Vale was privatized, despite widespread opposition among the population.
That led to the restructuring of the mining policy in Brazil, with the state taking the role of granting private companies permission to mine for minerals.
Between 2003 and 2013, under the Workers' Party governments, mining output grew by 550% in Brazil. It was a major contribution to the country's economic growth, but it also increased the impact on local communities. Now, with the arrival of President Jair Bolsonaro, the Brazilian government wants to increase mining activity on indigenous land, something that 85% of Brazilians oppose, according to a survey by Datafolha published this month. Bolsonaro also wants to make it easier for international capital to invest in mining in Brazil.
Now we have the challenge of dealing with a government that we can negotiate with, as we could before. We don't know how these governments, at national or regional level, will react to this situation, but the situation is certainly a very critical one.
The cities of Mariana in 2015 and Brumadinho in 2019 suffered the catastrophic collapse of dams operated by the Vale Mining Company. Almost 300 people lost their lives. They were the two biggest environmental crimes in Brazilian history. So what's the situation now for these communities and how are they struggling? That's what we'll be looking at in this series of reports.
Desde Minas Gerais, André Vieira e Sebastião Soto, Telesur, Brasil.
Still to come, the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa could go on strike as talks with car manufacturers stalled ongoing.
Infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, the American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide, deep into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on Telesur.
The Senate approved a 90-day extension of a state of emergency in Jamaica's popular tourist destinations has taken effect. The special security measure, which was set to expire on Tuesday, will continue until October 28th. Police have cited a significant increase in drug and gun-related crimes since the start of the year. The SOE covers the 3 parishes of St. James, which includes Montenegro Bay and Hanover, along with Westmoreland, which includes Negril. Over 1,000 delegates from 27 nations will stand in solidarity against neoliberal projects which trample Caribbean people's rights when the 8th Assembly of Caribbean People gets underway in Trinidad and Tobago. The summit will begin this Thursday and continue until next Monday under the theme Confronting the Imperialist Agenda while Strengthening the Resistance and Unity of Caribbean People. Participants will also discuss Caribbean integration and the consequences of racism, nationalism, and xenophobia. The Assembly of Caribbean People has recently expressed outrage over the new unilateral economic sanctions imposed by the United States on Venezuela.
And physical.
The president of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel, has said that Fidel Castro is more alive than ever on what would have been his 93rd birthday. Díaz-Canel said that people spontaneously paid their respects at the stone where Castro's ashes lay in act of faith, homage, and commitment. Vice President Ramiro Valdez Menendez said that although no school or hospital bears his name, Castro is always present and that he lives in every great work of the revolution. The government of South Africa has hailed the solidarity late Cuban leader Fidel Castro extended to the country's liberation movements during the struggle against the apartheid system.
We want to today pay homage as the South African government to the celebrations of the birthday of El Comandante Fidel Castro, a great hero of the people of Cuba, but a world icon in as far as progressive international outlook is concerned. Fidel Castro was the brother to Nelson Mandela, and we found very deep solidarity with the resilience of the people and the spirit of the people in terms of international solidarity. So today we join with the people of Cuba celebrations of this great father figure of international progressiveness.
The National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA, has threatened to call a strike following a deadlock in talks with the country's Car Manufacturers Council. NUMSA, which represents more than 300,000 workers in the automobile industry, is demanding a 12% wage increase. However, the Manufacturers Council has offered only a 4.5% rise. The current wage agreement in the sector will expire on August 31st, and a new deal has to be reached before then. The move by the South African government to deploy the army in Cape Town does not seem to be working as a deterrent against crime. Last weekend was the deadliest in the city since the deployment began last month, with 47 murders recorded. Matuba Malachi reports.
The city of Cape Town has just experienced its deadliest weekend since the deployment of the South African National Defence Force in crime hotspots in that Western Cape province. We are hearing that 47 people were killed over the weekend, and those are the statistics according to the Western Cape Province Forensic Department, saying that those very same crime hotspots that were supposed to be monitored by the army are still problematic. Hence, we see this high number of murders in just one weekend. And there's been a debate in South Africa on whether the deployment of the army in the Western Cape province, particularly in townships near Cape Town, and Cape Town itself would really yield any results. But could this be one of the reasons why people are skeptical about the deployment of the army in the Western Cape? Hence, 47 people have been killed in the same spots that the army is supposed to be overseeing to curb the high crime rate. Ironically, the Western Cape province, Cape Town in particular, is one of the provinces, so it's in one of the provinces that generates a lot of revenue from tourism. It's a favorite when it comes to tourist attraction. And just last week, the Minister of Tourism was allaying fears of crime in Cape Town, trying to assure tourists that Cape Town and the Western Cape in general are safe for tourists. But we've seen private companies gear up, beef up security, and trying to also assure their clients and to also assure the stream of revenue they get from tourism is maintained. But now the latest news of 47 people having been murdered are happening outside the Cape Town area where you would find a lot of tourists. And these hotspots are in townships where you mostly find people who are not white, black people mostly, who live in those areas where there is high rate of crime. And these statistics of 47 people dying come in exactly a day later when we receive statistics that in the 25 years of democracy, South Africa remains the most unequal place in the world. The poor got poorer and the rich got richer. Hence, we see the statistics that these murders over the weekend are happening in areas where there are a lot of social ills. But now it's a wait-and-see situation because nobody really has answers to what's really going on in the Western Cape province and whether this crime can be solved and people can live in harmony. Back to you, studio.
We thank Matuba for that report. The Zimbabwean opposition party, Movement for Democratic Change, is planning to march this week to protest against economic hardship. The MDC has resorted to protests since its loss in the latest elections, despite claiming that it won. The African country continues to endure sanctions imposed by the United States and its allies, and the opposition blames the ruling party for the challenges. Meanwhile, security forces have warned the protesters to maintain peace during the protest. Earlier this year, protests against the elections results turned violent, resulting in looting and loss of lives.
And that is the key word, peaceful. When people start going around town burning and looting and so on, that is no longer peaceful. And that cannot be allowed to happen because now you are interfering with other people's freedoms and you are also destroying other people's properties. And that is anarchy. We can't allow that.
Coming up after the break, demonstrators in Barcelona call for new European migration policies as support for migrants stranded at sea grows. Stay with us.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Earth. Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back to From the South. The Open Arms migrant rescue vessel has now spent 12 days at sea with 147 migrants on board, waiting to disembark at a safe European port. The vessel, which flies the Spanish flag, said that both Malta and Italy denied their request to evacuate 2 babies, one of whom has breathing problems. However, one child and their family have since had their evacuation authorized. An Italian court has said that the government violated national law by denying asylum to 28 unaccompanied minors on board. Demonstrators in the Catalan city of Barcelona have demanded that European Union and Spanish government allow the migrants to entry and express the need for a new European migratory policy. Hong Kong police have attempted to clear out protesters from the city's airport, which has been paralyzed for a second day. Clashes broke out between protesters and police outside the airport as police attempted to break up the unlawful assembly. Airport authorities canceled all flights earlier and asked passengers to leave the main terminal building. Protesters have been preventing passengers from checking in and passing through customs as all check-in activities have been suspended. Violent protests in Hong Kong have in recent days targeted public places such as metro and bus stations in an attempt to disrupt all social and economic activities as they oppose an extradition bill to China. Hong Kong's Chief Executive Carrie Lam has expressed great concern about the increasingly disruptive tactics of protesters. She urged them to calm down and stop pushing their own city into an abyss.
What happened over the past week made me worried that Hong Kong, which is believed to be a secure society that respects the rule of law, will reach a dangerous situation. All kinds of ailments and pathogenic factors will occur. Despite Hong Kong being an open, free, inclusive, and economically stable city, it will take a long time to recover, as I said last Sunday. 7 million people will not be able to live or work happily. So here, I plead to everyone again to put aside differences. Calm down, take 1 minute to think, look at our city, our home, and ask whether you really want to see it pushed into an abyss where it will be smashed to pieces. At present, what should be done is to fight against violence, safeguard the rule of law, and restore order. Once that has been achieved, sincere talks, repairing and rebuilding of harmonious society can begin.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch,